back with another video for you. If you like this content, please make sure to hit that lovely red subscribe button. You can also find me on Instagram at The Black Case Files, as well as also on TikTok at The Black Case Files. Anyways, let's get into it. Today, we are talking about the strange case of civil rights activist Ray Robinson. Robinson was a Black civil rights activist from Alabama who was also active in Mississippi and Washington, D.C. He was active in supporting the March on Washington and the Poor People's Campaign. Robinson disappeared while participating in the 1973 American Indian Movement, or AIM, resistance in the Wounded Knee incident on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in South Dakota, and he was never seen again. Ray Robinson was born Perry Ray Robinson on September 12, 1937 in Bogue Chitto, Alabama. He lived and attended school in the same town, eventually finding his way into boxing when, with his athleticism, he eventually became a prize fighter. Robinson began his activism after leaving the world of boxing, and he became a follower of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He participated in the 1963 March on Washington, and he heard King's noted "I Have a Dream" speech. He also participated in organizing Resurrection City, a camp set up in 1968 at the Washington Mall to draw attention to the plight of poor people of color in the United States. While participating in a 1966 anti-war rally in Madison, Wisconsin, he met Cheryl Boswell. They later married, and she returned with Robinson to Alabama, where they worked in grassroots movements for education and nutrition. They lived in Selma, Alabama, and they had 3 children together. In the late 1960s, Robinson supported the Vietnam Veterans Against the War, or VVAW. It was organized in 1967. It was during a 1973 meeting of VVAW, Robinson learned of the ongoing occupation of Wounded Knee, South Dakota by American Indian Movement activists at the Pine Ridge Reservation at the Pine Ridge Reservation to protest federal government policies. AIM was appealing for supporters, and according to his wife, Robinson decided to go to the reservation to support the occupation and to work to align the rights movements of both groups of people of color. 4 African Americans from Alabama went to Pine Ridge, but only 3 returned. So, what was Wounded Knee? The Wounded Knee occupation, also known as Second Wounded Knee, began on February 27th in 1973 when approximately 200 Oglala Lakota, sometimes referred to as Oglala Sioux, and followers of the American Indian Movement, AIM, seized and occupied the town of Wounded Knee. And this is in South Dakota, on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation. Oglala and AIM activists controlled the town for 71 days while the United States Marshals Service, FBI agents, and other law enforcement agencies cordoned off the area. The protest followed the failure of an effort of the Oglala Sioux Civil Rights Organization, or OSCRO, to impeach tribal president Richard Wilson, whom they accused of corruption and abuse of opponents. Additionally, protesters criticized the United States government's failure to fulfill treaties with Native American people and demanded the reopening of treaty negotiations to hopefully arrive at fair and equitable treatment of Native Americans. The occupation attracted wide media coverage, especially after the press accompanied the 2 U.S. senators from South Dakota to Wounded Knee. The events electrified Native Americans, and many Native American supporters traveled to Wounded Knee to join the protest. At the time, there was widespread public sympathy for the goals of the occupation, as Americans were becoming more aware of long-standing issues of injustice related to Native Americans. Afterward, AIM leaders Dennis Banks and Russell Means were indicted on charges related to the events, but their 1974 case was dismissed by the federal court for prosecutorial misconduct, a decision that was upheld on appeal. Wilson stayed in office, and in 1974 he was reelected amid charges of intimidation, voter fraud, and other abuses. The rate of violence climbed on the reservation as conflict opened between political factions in the following 3 years. So residents accused Wilson's private militia, which were called the Guardians of Oglala Nation, GOONS, of much of it. So more than 60 opponents of tribal government died violently during those years, including Pedro Bissonnet, director of the Ougla Sioux Civil Rights Organization, which I said was OSCRO. Bradford Little, the founder of the United States Pacifist Party, said this about Robinson. He was quite forthcoming and very vigorous and willing to take risks. He put himself out in front of the project, and we decided we would take him on into the South. In addition, the first black female judge in the state of Alabama, Rose Sanders, who is now known as Theodore Rose Toure, described Robinson by saying this: he was a true soldier, he was a true liberator. He really believed all people should be free. Cheryl Robinson never saw her husband again, and she filed a missing persons report with the Federal Bureau of Investigation when he failed to return home from Wounded Knee. In October of 1974, Cheryl traveled to the AIM offices in Rapid City, South Dakota, and its headquarters in St. Paul, Minnesota, but she was not able to learn much more about her husband's fate. Now, although his burial site has not been discovered and his body has never been discovered, Robinson was later declared legally dead. In 2011, AIM leader Carter Camp told Robinson's daughters that the guardians of the Ougla Nation, goons, killed their father. This prompted Robinson's daughter, Tamara Camara, to hire Buffalo-based attorney Michael Kuzma to finally get answers. Kuzma filed a Freedom of Information Act request with the FBI for records concerning Robinson's disappearance. In 2013, Kuzma filed a lawsuit in the United States District Court for the Western District of New York to gain full access to the documents about the case. Now, what actually happened? Dennis Banks, then a top leader within AIM, said that he had no knowledge of Ray Robinson. He didn't know that man, he's never seen that man. He stated that he had never met Robinson and only learned of his being at Wounded Knee only through inquiries by his family members. He said, over the years, the Robinson name has popped up and I'm not even sure even who would have that information or where it was. It's a complete blank to me. However, an interview he did with his former common law wife, Darlene Nichols, in 2001, says differently. Nichols, who interviewed Banks while trying to learn more about the 1975 murder of Anna Mae Aquash, who was another AIM activist. It was at this time Banks happened to discuss Robinson by saying that he had been shot by another AIM officer after provoking a fight with him, and he bled to death because the group was under siege and they had no way to treat him adequately. Now, even though he said this, prosecutors declined to follow up on this, mostly because it sounded like an accidental killing and also in part because the statute of limitations had expired for anything but first-degree murder. On March 11th of 2014, the FBI released documents to Kuzma confirming the death of a black civil rights activist during the 1973 AIM occupation of Wounded Knee. A memorandum from the FBI dated May 21st of 1973 reported that an Indian woman who had left the village said there were 200 Indians, 11 whites, and 2 blacks in the occupation. Robinson was reported as having been accompanied to the siege by a black woman. She returned to her hometown, but he disappeared. Now, Kuzma said FBI files included statements that Robinson had been tortured and murdered within the AIM occupation perimeter, and then his remains were buried in the hills. Robinson had adopted a nonviolent philosophy in his civil rights work, and this position put him at odds with AIM, which conducted armed resistance to the federal government. This likely added to existing suspicions of him as an outsider to the Indian movement. The Pine Ridge Reservation had already been disrupted because of severe internal political conflict over the leadership of Richard Wilson. So you're basically going into a hotbed of activity. So one witness who was interviewed by FBI agents said that Robinson had been in Wounded Knee for approximately a week before his death. And it was during this time that Robinson had trouble adapting to the harsh conditions and the discipline that was imposed under the siege. So just so you have an idea, these conditions include a shortage of food, constant surveillance, regular shootings, as the occupation was under fire, and the unilateral AIM command. In addition, the witness reported that Robinson tried to discuss strategies, but no one listened or gave him any serious consideration. Again, you have someone who's nonviolent trying to propose a different way of doing things. So after he got into a heated exchange with another activist, he was escorted to a house by a security team. It was there, supposedly, Robinson grabbed a butcher knife from a table and the team gathered around him. The witness continued by saying, "The next thing I heard a loud bang and saw Mr. Robinson's lower leg spin out from the knee and rotate outward as he started to fall forward. His eyes went down." Now, according to Bernie Lafferty, a witness who confirmed Robinson's presence on the reservation during the Wounded Knee occupation or the Wounded Knee incident, several AIM members openly discussed the murder of a black man whom they had burned on the hillside. It wasn't until years later that AIM member Richard Two Elk described Robinson's behavior. He would eat what little food we had. There was no food, so everyone was trying not to eat, and then got this guy over here eating freely all the time. AIM members resented his actions, and Two Elk said that one of the things that was quite apparent was the conflict and the clash of the two concepts of social rights, civil rights, and Indian rights. Indian rights are on a whole different context. They, meaning the blacks, were coming from rights within the system, and Indian rights were about sovereignty and independent nation, so coming from outside of the system. Another account said that Robinson was shot in the knee after the security team entered the bunker. He was dragged outside, beaten, and taken to the Wounded Knee medical clinic. Robinson was reportedly held in a closet where he bled to death. Robinson is currently survived by his widow, Cheryl Boswell Robinson, and their 3 children, their daughters, Desiree Mark and Tamara Camara, and son, J. Mark Robinson. All right, thanks for watching, friends. I'll see you next time with another Black Case File. I try to upload about 3 to 4 times per week, so just make sure that you follow me on Instagram at the Black Case Files. See what we'll be uploading next. See you next time. Bye.